Carolyn Voss had run the Millhaven Community Center for 11 years, and in 11 years she had seen most of the ways people found their way to each other. The slow ones, the sudden ones, the ones that looked random until you lined up the pieces afterward and saw that they had been building for months. She liked the slow ones best. They had a weight to them that the sudden ones didn't. She was fairly sure what she was watching with Ray Callister and Lena Marsh qualified as one of the slow ones, and she had been watching it since September. Ray had been bringing his daughter Wren to the Saturday morning community fair for 2 years. He was 43, a widower, ran a small catering operation from the converted back kitchen of his house on Elmswood. He did corporate lunches, small event work, occasional private dinners. He was not the kind of man who drew attention to himself. He drove a 7-year-old Jeep, wore the same dark flannel most Saturday mornings, and had a quality of stillness that Carolyn had learned was not shyness, but the efficient conservation of a man who had a great deal to do and had learned not to waste effort on performance. He always arrived with Wren, 8 years old, red sneakers, a reading book in her backpack, and he always stayed for the whole morning, which she had noticed was not something most parents did. Dr. Lena Marsh had moved to the neighborhood in April. She was a pediatric physician at the Aldworth practice, 41, recently relocated from the city, and she had started showing up at the community fair in late summer as a volunteer for the first aid station. Not dramatically, not as a production, just as a practical thing a doctor with Saturday mornings free could do. Carolyn had appreciated it without making a fuss about it. Lena was not the kind of person who wanted a fuss made. The first time had been the third Saturday in September. Wren had scraped her knee badly on the gravel track, and before Carolyn had finished reaching for her radio, Lena was already there, crouched down, doing the thing that Carolyn would describe afterward as the most efficiently kind piece of first aid she had ever watched. She cleaned it, wrapped it, and the entire time she talked to Wren the way adults rarely talk to 8-year-olds, straight, calm, as if the information she was giving her was information she was entitled to and not a performance of reassurance. She said, "This is going to sting for a second." She said, "It's not deep." She said, "You're going to be completely fine." She said all of it like the truth, which it was, and Wren heard the truth in it and stopped crying before the wrap was done. Ray had arrived from across the field at a run and stopped 4 steps away when he saw the situation was handled. Lena looked up, said, "She's fine, scrape only." She was very calm about it. He crouched down to Wren's level and said, "Okay." Wren said, "She told me it wasn't deep, and she was right." He said, "That's good." Then he looked at Lena and said, "Thank you." He said it simply, without theater, and she said, "Of course," and that was the whole of it. What happened over the next 6 weeks, Carolyn observed in pieces. Wren had apparently talked about Lena at home with some frequency. Carolyn knew this because Wren mentioned it at the Saturday fair the following week, mentioned in the offhand way children mentioned things that they have been thinking about a great deal, that her dad had asked what the doctor's name was. And the week after that, she mentioned that her dad had been cooking something specific the previous Thursday and had said it was for a delivery to the community center. Carolyn had found a sealed container in the kitchen on Friday morning with no note. Inside, a chicken and white bean stew with rosemary, enough for 8 servings, better than anything that had come through the volunteer kitchen that quarter. There was no name on the container and no explanation. She had served it at the Friday lunch program. The volunteers had asked who made it. The following Saturday, Ray and Wren arrived at the usual time. Lena was at the first aid station. Wren walked directly to the first aid station, said good morning, and told Lena that her dad had made the stew and left it for the center. Carolyn was close enough to hear this. Lena looked over toward Ray, who had absolutely noticed that his daughter had done this, and was examining the information table with the focused attention of a man who has decided to find a brochure very interesting. "That was very good, Stu," Wren said. "He makes it for his clients." Lena said, "Tell him it was appreciated." Wren said, "You could tell him yourself." Carolyn found somewhere else to be. She did not see the next part, but she heard about it from Wren the following week, with the kind of detailed recall that suggested Wren had reviewed the memory several times. He had come to the first aid station. He had said, "I heard you liked the stew." She had said, "I did." He had said, "I'm glad." A pause. He had said, "I don't usually leave things without a note." She had said, "I noticed." Another pause. He had said, "I could leave a note next time." She had said, "You could do that." The note arrived with a second container the following Thursday. Carolyn read it because it was her center and the container was addressed to the center, and the note said, "Chicken and root vegetable, serves 6. The rosemary is from the garden. Ray Callister, Elmswood Catering." And at the bottom, in the same handwriting, "If you're free Saturday morning, I usually arrive around 9. She was there at 9. What Carolyn watched over the following months was, as she would describe it to her sister at Christmas, the most well-organized slow romance she had ever seen, conducted almost entirely in the vicinity of a folding table and a first aid kit and the community center parking lot. They talked for the first 4 Saturdays, as people talk who are interested in what the other person is saying and are taking their time about it. He brought food 3 more times, always to the center, always with a practical note, never with anything that couldn't be read as professional generosity, unless you were watching. Wren treated the entire development with the satisfaction of someone who considers herself largely responsible for it, and is correct. By December, he had asked her to dinner, which was not at the community center, and she had said yes, which Carolyn learned from Wren before she learned it from either of the adults involved. Wren reported it as a fact, with the additional informations that her dad had made the reservation a week in advance and had asked her opinion on the restaurant which she had given. She had recommended somewhere with good bread. He had taken the recommendation. In January, saw them arrive at the Saturday fair together for the first time. Not dramatically, not as an announcement, just together, the way people who have decided to be somewhere arrive when they are no longer arriving separately. Wren was between them with her reading book and her red sneakers, and she walked at the pace of someone who is exactly where she intends to be. Carolyn thought about the container with no note, the container with the note, and the 9 o'clock Saturday morning, and the reservation made a week in advance with Wren's restaurant recommendation consulted, and she thought, yes, that is how the slow ones work. You lay down pieces carefully, and eventually you look back and see that what looked like ordinary things arranged in ordinary time was something else entirely, something built on purpose, something that knew what it was doing all along. She filed it under things she was glad to have watched. There were not as many of those as she would have liked. This one she was keeping.